Thank you so much, Shilpa, and it is great to be with all of you today. So, let's get started on talking about what is the Asian American glass ceiling. Thanks to the model minority myth, most people assume that Asian Americans are super successful. That's why I find it helpful to describe this as an age 30 problem. Asian Americans are highly diverse, but as a group, starting out, we do get into the best schools and into the best companies. But then, at just the age when we should start to take advantage of all that hard work and education and start to soar, we plummet from being America's most successful group to its least. Asian Americans' rate of promotion is less than that of any other group. So Asian Americans now are 6% of the US population, 13% of the professional workforce, but only 1.5% of Fortune 500 corporate officers. So the Asian American glass ceiling does not look like a slab of glass. It's more like a haze, like air pollution. At first it's hard to see, but over time it stifles the career of nearly every Asian American. The financial implications of this are huge. Dustin and I were talking about this before. In your early 30s, you could be losing out on tens of thousands of dollars a year. Going into your late 30s and 40s and 50s, that could rise to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. Over your career, this translates into millions. And since in the US wealth is built generationally, the financial implications of this and the financial implications and lost opportunities are huge for you and your family. Beyond that, when you start out with so much expectation and so much potential and then watch your future shrivel, that can result in a huge amount of disappointment, frustration, and even shame. All this begs a question. Do Asians make good leaders? I mean, if we don't, then there wouldn't be an equity problem at all, right? Well, fortunately, it happens that in 2022, Goldman Sachs studied this question. They studied the performance of 5,000 CEOs and found that when Asian American CEOs are appointed, it's usually to rescue a company in crisis. And it turns out the median Asian American CEO led their company from underperformance to outperforming their sector average by 50%. Goldman concludes, the outperformance of Asian American-led companies suggests that Asian Americans may bring unique abilities and perspectives to leadership roles that enable them to succeed. Well, we can't solve a problem we don't understand, so today I'll take you to the cutting edge of cognitive psychology to see why we face a glass ceiling in the first place. And I'll show you 5 simple steps that you can use right away to build the network you need to break through. But first, you might be wondering how I worked all this out and got to where I am. The truth is, I've always been interested in these topics because I know how it feels to be an outsider. Sorry, I'm going to try to stay closer to this. It all started when I was a kid growing up in Maryland. So that's me in the pink and white sweater, my parents, my brother, and in the middle, my grandmother, our nanai, who lived with us. My parents had saved and sacrificed to buy a house in a good school district, which meant that we were the oddball Chinese in a school that was nearly all white. One evening, I was about 13, my dad and I were at home when he said, "Tonight's the night of my department's Christmas party." I asked why he didn't go, and he said, "Because when I go to those things, I never know what to say to people." It felt like a lightning bolt had crashed down on my head. I suddenly realized 2 things. One, Dad and I had the same problem. We didn't know how to talk to white people. And 2, I realized that this problem would forever limit his career and his life. It didn't matter that Dad was born in China, had made it all the way to MIT, and now was the hardest worker in his department. In Dad's 30-year career, he remained an individual contributor until he retired. That night, I resolved to figure out how things really work in American society so that I could get out there and make a difference. Now, I wasn't sure that I could because at school, I was so awkward. The white kids, we call the white kids Americans as if the Americans, we call the white kids Americans as if we weren't Americans too. The white kids always seemed so carefree, and I always wondered how they could be so carefree. I had a recurring dream that one day I'd wake up and realized that my entire life had been a gigantic mistake. I would have blonde hair and blue eyes and live in a big house, and then finally the other kids would like me. So I kept struggling to connect. And then finally, after many humiliating encounters, I went from outsider to the ultimate insider. At age 31, I was appointed deputy mayor of Los Angeles, a city where 90+ languages are spoken in our schools. Then I was recruited to the executive search firm Heidrick & Struggles, where I started a careers blog to teach others the unwritten rules of the game while I was recruiting CEOs and board members for Fortune 500 companies. The blog that I wrote went viral in China, launching me there as an author and then founder of a global leadership training company which served millions. Then the trade war, and then the pandemic. I returned to the States and I founded the Multicultural Leadership Institute, where I help companies develop more effective leaders and where I teach the Asian American Leadership Accelerator, a 6-week course on the soft skills that Asian Americans need to succeed in corporate America more quickly and easily. So, why is there a glass ceiling for Asian Americans? Sorry, here we go. Lots of pictures. Let's do an experiment. I'll show you a picture for 2 seconds. You try to remember what you see. Ready? Go. 1, 2. Okay. What did you see? Let's just hear it. Call out what you just saw. Okay, I heard fish. How many fish did you see? I heard 5. Did anyone see another number of fish? 3. Okay, I'm hearing 3 and I hear 5. What else did you see? Frog. Anything else? What? Bubbles? There are some bubbles. Anything else? Green water. Anything else? Seaweed. How many like sticks of seaweed? 3. Very good. So, scientists found that what you saw in that picture may actually depend on who you are. People who grew up in Western cultures tend to notice and recall the primary objects, in this case, the 3 big fish, while Asians tend to notice and recall the surroundings, in this case, the 2 small fish, the plants, frogs, snail, and rocks. Neither perspective is wrong, but both are incomplete. Now, since you're joining me today, I'm guessing you are probably quite weird. By that, I don't mean to offend. I'm just saying that you are probably from a Western-educated, industrialized, rich democracy. That's an acronym that Harvard anthropologist Joe Henrich developed in 2010, which ever since has become common in the social sciences literature. And if you're following along in your action guide, we should be probably around pages 2 or 3. You can follow along in there as we go. So, in fact, so you got the Western-educated, industrialized, rich democracy. In fact, weird people are only 12% of the world's population, and yet are unusually prosperous and powerful, which is explained in part by the fact that weird people are some of the most psychologically unusual people on Earth. So why are there weird and non-weird cultures in the first place? After spreading out from Africa, humans settled different regions of the world and over time developed civilizations, each with unique norms to help solve the problems they faced in their environment. Weird cultures stretch back to ancient Greece, whose geography enabled fishing, hunting, trading, and shipping, lucrative careers which require less cooperation with others. With this wealth and sense of personal agency, weird people evolved to be exceptionally individualistic, self-confident, seeing themselves as independent actors and heroes in their own stories. So think Homer's Odyssey or ancient Greek sculpture. In perception, weird people then tend to zero in on primary objects apart from their context, as we saw in the underwater scene. And weird thinking styles became what researchers call analytical, focused on problem solving by breaking down big problems into parts and then solving them one at a time. The geography of ancient India and China was better suited to large-scale agriculture, requiring massive irrigation systems and highly complex social structures. Asian societies evolved to be collectivist, so that personal identities became less about I and more about we, heavily influenced by our relationships and responsibilities to others. Asian thinking styles became what researchers call holistic, seeing entire scenes and solving problems by considering things in relationship to their context. You can see this in ancient Indian art. What is amazing to me is that all six of those six earliest civilizations were established in just the last 275 generations. Right, to the math. So if this is you and your mother and your grandmother, then all six of these six civilizations, starting from Mesopotamia, arose in just the 272 generations before her. Within this time, they diversified into modern societies. But how people learned how to behave was from their parents and close contacts. So societies remained imprinted by their cultural legacies. Now, 30 generations ago, on the right side, you see that the printing press was invented. Now, that did speed up the transmission of cultural ideas within and across groups. But it was only until the last 5 generations that the vast majority of people could even read. Then, in our lifetimes, an explosion happened. In August of 1991, the first website appeared. In January of 2023, 5.2 billion people around the world were using the internet. This has caused an explosion of cultural transmission and cultural production. Suddenly, with Instagram and TikTok, there are all sorts of new cultures popping up left and right, each with their own norms. If you have teenage daughters like I do, you know all about that. So sometimes it can even feel like we're living in an era beyond culture. And yet we're still shaped by ancient traditions that have been passed down through the generations. So Westerners highly value speaking, for example, as the #1 way to express your individuality. Individuality being the #1 weird value. So for Westerners, speaking and thinking are so entwined that if you don't speak, they assume you're not thinking, which would obviously be a bad thing. Asians don't value speaking as much. In our traditions, silence is seen as a sign of respect. Silence allows all parties to reflect on what's been said. And in fact, silence is necessary for deep thinking, which is why we have meditation. Cultural differences translate into cognitive differences. Westerners form thoughts using words and therefore use the same parts of their brains for speaking and thinking. But as UCSB cognitive psychologist Hee-Jung Kim writes, Asians think and reason in a less verbalizable way than Westerners. So when talking aloud, Westerners just vocalize their thoughts. But Asian Americans, on top of solving the problems, have to translate their thoughts into words. But all this raises a question. Why do so many Asian Americans behave the Asian way? Aren't we Americans after all? And if America is the land of immigrants, why are American companies so weird? All right, pop quiz. What % of Asian American adults over age 25 do you think were born in another country? You can just call it out. What %, and if you know the answer, please do not call it out. If you don't know the answer, please guess. What % of all Asian American adults over age 25 are immigrants? 50, 40, 70, 45, 25, okay, 60. All right. The answer is 71%. 71% of Asian American adults were born in another country. All right, let's try again. What % of all American adults, including Asian American adults, over age 25 were born in another country? 90? 90% of all American adults were born in another country. Anyone else? 10, 30, 60. All right, let's see the answer. The answer is 17%. Isn't that remarkable? The reason why Asian Americans behave in the ways of the old country is that 3/4 of us are from the old country. And most of us who were born here, like me, are the kids of those immigrants. So even if we speak, quote, perfect English, we were raised in Asian ways. Meantime, only 17% of all American adults were born in another country. So to succeed here, you must behave in the weird ways that most Americans were raised in, but which are very different from the way that Asian Americans were raised. Cultural differences lead to exclusion. For hundreds of generations, we stuck with our tribes. Most of us still do. In fact, the field of sociology is largely about how humans form groups. Groups are pulled together by forces of attraction, specifically homophily, which is just a fancy way of saying birds of a feather flock together. We all connect more with folks like us. Group boundaries are enforced by forces of repulsion, meaning that people within a group tend to agree on their negative stereotypes of outgroup individuals. So, for example, Asian Americans are stereotyped as uncreative robots, tech not exec, perpetual foreigners. All this leads to the phenomenon of the interchangeable Asian. People often confuse us with other Asians. And if people can't remember your name, you can forget about getting promoted. So these stereotypes lead to something called role incongruence. In other words, the traits associated with us don't overlap with the traits associated with leadership. When an Asian American does show leadership skills, the bar is set higher in order to dispel any doubt that that person is fit for a particular role. Right? This is the exact opposite of what happens for majority group members who get the benefit of the doubt. So in a major study of American adults, researchers asked two questions. First, they asked, looking back at the last 6 months, who are the people with whom you discuss matters important to you? Write down their first names. Then they went down the list and they asked the race of each person listed. And they found that 45% of Latinos, 65% of African Americans, and 75% of whites discuss matters of importance only with people of their own race. Asians were excluded from this research, as we often are, but if they included us, we'd be up there too. So this chart shows how homophily leads to homogeneity. Most Americans discuss matters of importance only with people of our own race. White Americans are at the top because majority group networks tend to be even more homophilous than others. Now, lest you think that this is only about white Americans with certain politics, think again. The percent on the left side of white Republicans, Democrats, and independents whose core social networks are entirely comprised of whites are all remarkably close to 75%. There's very little variation across geography, gender, or even age. The chart on the right side shows that 72% of white Americans aged 18 to 29 have core social networks entirely comprised of whites. Now, to be clear, this happens not because white Americans are bad. This happens because white Americans are humans, and this is how humans behave. In China, where over 90% of the population is ethnic Chinese like me, it's the ethnic Chinese who bind together and exclude white people, Muslims, and others. So why do you think humans have evolved to form groups this way? You can just call out your answers. Why do we do this? Evolutionary safety, okay. Bias, safety. I like that idea of safety. I mean, we have to cooperate with people whom we trust to share food and other resources, right? I mean, probably think about the poor people who were super inclusive, thousands of years ago. They might not have lived long enough to pass along their genes, right? What is it? Language? Language is a great reason, right? I mean, you just might not be able to communicate with people who are different from you. Trust? Okay, super. And it just feels like cozy and comfortable even today, right? To be with and have that joy of instant understanding. I mean, I personally love that. But can anyone think of any downsides to this behavior that we all engage in? What did you say? You become a frog in a well. Okay, yeah, that's very dramatic and very, very visual illustration of what will happen. Right? You might be all by yourself. It might be lonely in there. It might be hard to get food. Anything else? Are there any other downsides What are the implications of being frogs in a well? Let's say you have a whole bunch of frogs just like you. You might have problems like too much judgment, like blind spots, maybe, lack of innovation, echo chambers. Sure, that all these happen in organizations. In society, we might have things like racial strife, hatred, social division. All of these things are not great, right? So at work specifically, in workplaces, because Asian Americans are often the most culturally different people on any team, we tend to get isolated on the edges of corporate networks like this, as what researchers call peripherals, right? So if everyone else is engaging in homophily, especially majority group members, and the more different you are, the more to the edges you become. Asian Americans tend to be isolated on the very edges like this. We see them in red, right? So as we saw earlier, Asian Americans tend to be heavily recruited into companies. But the way that HR works in companies, I was a recruiter for a long time. We recruit people based on their individual attributes. But whether or not they actually get promoted or are able to make impact depends on their network positions, which is different than what we recruited them for. And most companies focus on recruiting people in and do very little to integrate people into the networks that they need to actually succeed and get promoted and do their jobs well. We see this most in the experience of Asian Americans because Asian Americans tend to be the most culturally different on any group. So even Asian Americans who start out more central to the networks of individual contributors tend to get stuck out to the outside as peripherals by the time they start moving up. So let's say they're more central on the networks of individual contributors, but then they become managers, VPs, boom. That's what tends to happen to Asian Americans. And as long as you're a peripheral, you'll be stuck, unable to move up or to create greater impact. So as you see on your action guide on page 3, the glass ceiling results from a vicious cycle of several factors. First, cultural differences. This leads to biased perceptions of us as perpetual foreigners, which drives our isolation to the fringes of corporate networks. When we're on the fringes, we lack the ability to make impact or to move up. And we know from organizational psychology that lack of belonging leads to a continuous loss of self, leads to things like imposter syndrome. When you're continuously getting signals that you don't belong, you'll naturally begin to feel unconfident, uncomfortable, alienated, and even like a fraud. Imposter syndrome is rooted in isolation. All this naturally causes many of us to retreat to the comfort of our own Asian communities, and so this cycle spins around and around. To keep most Asian Americans stuck, but just because this vicious cycle is natural does not make it inevitable. The good news is, now that we understand the Asian American glass ceiling, we can start to dismantle it. The most direct point of leverage is our isolation. What we need to break this vicious cycle is relationships. And the very good news is we have allies. All the exclusion is, for the most part, unconscious. Americans overwhelmingly recognize Asian Americans as an asset to our country. Across the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, and independents overwhelmingly say that Asian Americans benefit the United States. A 2022 survey found that 72% of Americans believe that anti-Asian American racism should be addressed by Americans. I do think that the surge of anti-Asian hate in recent years has shifted something in this country, and it's been a wake-up call for all of us, including our allies. So let's work on recruiting more allies into your network. Everyone knows you need to network, but what's the best way? People often assume the bigger the network, the better. That's not true. The bigger your network, the worse. Because when your network is too big, it sucks up too much of your time and bandwidth and distracts you from developing the strategic relationships that you actually need. So earlier we saw a network map showing how Asians often are peripherals. Let's now look at the most powerful people in an organization. The figure in front shows a team with 3 social groups, A, B, and C. The 2 most highly connected people are Sage and Adrian. Each one has 7 connections. But notice, all of Adrian's connections are within group B, while Sage's connections are spread out across A, B, and C. So, I'd like for you guys to guess. Who has a more strategic network? Adrian or Sage? Raise your hand for Adrian, if Adrian has a more strategic network. Okay, I see a couple of hands raised. Now raise your hand if you think Sage has a more strategic network. Okay, I see a lot more hands raised. Very good. Sage has a more strategic network. She can quickly spread ideas across groups A, B, and C. Organizational psychologists call her a boundary spanner. Adrian is powerful, but he's not inclusive. He enforces the values and norms within group B. He's called a central connector. B, Sage. Okay, boundary spanners not only are the most influential people in an organization, they are the drivers of innovation. Adrian and his friends mostly share the same ideas and opportunities, so he's not really well positioned to innovate, and he's not really well positioned to hear about great new opportunities. Sage is the only person in this entire network who gets access to ideas and opportunities from all 3 groups. So I've taken decades of research into boundary spanners and combined them with all my experience as deputy mayor and a CEO headhunter into 5 steps that you can take starting today to build a more powerful network of strategic allies. As we walk through each step, I hope that you'll identify obvious areas of opportunity for your current situation. You can follow along in your workbooks. So step 1 is to leverage your work to authentically build a broad network. So, people often tell us, oh, you need to learn to golf if you want to network, or you should go to happy hours and learn football. You don't need to do actually any of those things. You can actually build a network more directly by turning your work into a network expanding opportunity. So make a list of all the people who are touched by your work, not just the people above you, but people across from you, even the people below you. And then think about all the skills and knowledge that you need to make a bigger impact, and identify the gaps between what you need and what you have. Okay, so maybe you have all the technical skills that you need, but you lack political savvy. Maybe you're developing a product and you can use customer insights from folks on the front lines. Make your list diverse, not just people of your race or gender or age. You could ask your boss who you should get to know. And then reach out and meet up. It could be just a 30-minute Zoom coffee. If someone ignores you, no problem, just move on. When it's time to meet someone, step 2 is to energize. To energize is to spread contagious positive energy. Think about it. Some people drain you of energy. Have you ever had a toxic boss? I'm raising my hand. Then you know what a de-energizer is, right? Like work jerks, like someone you see them on your calendar and your blood pressure starts to go up. Now picture someone who energizes you. Energizers are like the sun. When I worked in China the past decade, wherever I went, I tried to energize. And that's a big reason I became what the Wall Street Journal called an icon for women in China. It's so easy. It's so simple. Anyone can do it. If you're on the shy side, no problem. Energizing is not about being high energy. It's about imparting energy to others. And introverts are just as likely as extroverts to be seen as energizers. So what should you do when you meet someone? Asians, I feel like we're often saying to each other, you are so amazing, but you're too modest. You got to toot your horn. So when you meet someone, typically what happens is they'll say, tell me about yourself. And you'll say, okay, I went to Harvard, and then I did this, and I did this, and this. Don't do that. People hate people who went to Harvard. And Asians already are stereotyped as cold and competent, which is a construct that prompts people to want to envy you and then undermine you. If you talk about Harvard, your other Ivy League credentials, all these things, that will cause a double cold competent reaction and will often cause people to distance themselves from you. So the cold competent stereotype will cause people to want to take you down a notch. There's really fascinating research on this. So instead, when they say, tell me about yourself, you could say, I'd be glad to tell you about myself, but first, tell me about you. What are you working on now? What are you looking to accomplish in the next 3 or 6 months? And then try to only dribble out information about yourself in the context of how you can help them or how you can partner with them. So you can make it like a game, right? Try not to say anything that just makes you look good. The best way to toot your horn is not to tell people how capable you are. It's to show them by showing them how capable you are of partnering with them to help them achieve their goals. Let them think, oh man, I need this person on my team. So keep energizing. Energizers win by making people around them feel energized, inspired, and connected. That's why people love being with them, and that's why they are magnets for new opportunities. Step 3 is to tap your network for ideation and implementation. Many people seek outside input at the start of a project, the quote, idea generation phase, and then go back to their desk, build a product, make it perfect, tie it up with a bow before exposing it again to the world. Not many people continuously solicit other people's input. Very few people keep tapping their networks when deadlines are tight and the pressure is on. But when the pressure is on is when boundary spanners tap their networks. So I'll give you an example. When I first built out the Asian American Leadership Accelerator, I recruited a private beta group of a few outstanding Asian American professionals to give me input and validation and pushbacks and reality checks. Every step of the way, I partially developed an idea, then shared it out and sought their feedback. Some people in this group immediately rated the program 10 out of 10 every step of the way, which is nice for the ego. But there also were some naysayers. To be honest, I was a little hurt when somebody rated it 7 and somebody else rated it 6. But when I then followed up with those two to ask for brutal honesty on how to make this an 11 out of 10 experience, I got amazing insights that I never could have thought of myself. So when you tap your network for both ideation and implementation, you enable yourself to develop more creative and comprehensive products which are more closely tied to your market. And by seeking input early on from stakeholders and influencers, and especially maybe from naysayers, you reduce the chance of them getting in your way later. In fact, this gives them all a stake in the outcome of your project. So when you do go to market, they're ready to help execute and spread and sell. Step 4 is to continuously churn your network and nurture your relationships. Churn refers to the extent to which people move in and out of your network. You want a few people who are trusted advisors and truth tellers, the people you have a long history with, but you also want a steady stream of new ideas and expertise. Not all the people who are in your network now should still be in your network a year from now. As for those who add less value, you don't have to ghost them. You just limit your time with them. Start saying no to unnecessary activities that keep you connected to the wrong people. And for the people who do add value, keep deepening those relationships. Deeply understand everyone's needs, goals, strengths, and weaknesses. Step 5, pursue mutual wins to co-create successes. Of course, the fastest way to nurture relationships is to pursue wins that benefit others as much as they do you. When your internal client helps you improve your product that helps them succeed, then everybody wins. Always remember, you're not just here to build your own career and your own story. You're here to co-create everyone's. So there you go. 5 simple steps to help you build a powerful network of strategic allies, to enable you to break through and scale up your impact more quickly and easily. Leverage your work. You can read them. I'm not going to read them for you. You could budget 10% of your time to doing these 5 things. If you do that, right now, a lot of people are saying, gosh, I'm so busy right now. How would I even have time to do this? If you budget 10% of your time, that would be like one morning or one afternoon a week, and just did these 5 things, you could build a powerful network and execute better and more quickly on your current work as well. The great thing about these 5 steps is that they're not chores like doing the laundry or washing the dishes. They're fun because they're all about learning about ourselves and about each other and about how we can work with the people around us to achieve more. So I'd like to know, can you find an idea or two in here that you can use right away? If yes, raise your hand. That's great. To help you along even further, inside your action guide are 5 more pages to help you create your networking plan. And I hope that you'll experiment with these 5 steps and with that networking plan and keep iterating. Figure out what's working for you, what's not working for you. Keep iterating with all of these steps so that over time you make them your own. In fact, the act of doing anything new is improvisational. It's the same with all art and with all science. Guided by data, we start from where we are, we start from the known, and we move out into the unknown. Guided by data, we use our imaginations. Let's stop for a moment and see how unique is this approach from what most people do. Most people just rely on themselves and their inner circle and only reach out to their networks when they need something. But since most people's networks consist of people like themselves, that limits their ability to access broader resources. And it's because most folks stick with folks like ourselves that we need more connection in our world. So when you systematically start creating these connections for yourself and others, you may find that magic happens in your career. While the glass ceiling has stifled the careers of most Asian Americans, I was one of the lucky ones. By now, I've worked at the top of 3 different industries on 3 different continents. And the strange thing is, I never applied for any of those jobs. Each time I entered into a new industry, I was invited in, and I was invited to the top. There are millions of smart and hardworking people in the world. Why do I get all the luck? Well, first off, a lot of it is just simply that I have been ridiculously, unfairly lucky due to circumstances well beyond my control. But some of my luck is because of the way that I network. In fact, when the Los Angeles Times profiled me, they titled the article simply, "The Networker." How do I network? I continuously generate pull. Sorry, this is a little bit off here. It says generate pull. I continuously generate pull for new people and ideas and opportunities in my life. And I do it through the 5 steps that we just did, that we just went through. Those 5 steps continuously bring new people into my life. And it's by partnering with them that I'm able to scale up my impact. And what I found is that when I start scaling up my impact and I continue to generate more pull for new people into my life, then new people just start appearing in my life. And they bring me new opportunities that I never could have thought of for myself. In fact, building a powerful network of strategic allies is just one of the 8 unwritten rules that I teach in depth in the Asian American Leadership Accelerator, but which I have written up for free in this guide to the unwritten rules of the game. So if you'd like to get that, you're welcome to get, it's like a 10-page guide to the unwritten rules of the game at themli.net/rules. Because this is what I found. When you master the unwritten rules of the game and use them to create impact at scale and continue to keep generating pull, people start appearing, bringing you new opportunities that you just couldn't imagine. This way, even amidst mass layoffs and crazy economic uncertainty, you may be able to keep reinventing yourself, just as I and the world's most successful people continuously do. Now, often as I do this work, I think of my dad, who came to the States with so much hope and so much potential, and then became that quiet Asian guy, isolated on the fringes, lacking belonging, and unable to reach his potential. How much more could Dad have achieved? How much more fulfilled could he have been? If only he'd known how to build the relationships he needed to break through. It's too late now for Dad. He died in the pandemic. But each time I remember him, I think of how awesome is this power that we each now have to connect better with one another, with the people around us, in order to scale up our impact and do more in the world. I know that after 3 years of pandemic and racial reckoning, many of us are exhausted. Many of us are grieving. But let us now not compound all the tragedy by failing to act. I may not know you, but I do know this about you. You were born to make an impact. You have something good and important to offer our world, even if you don't know it yet, even if the world doesn't see it yet. Our world has so many problems, and to solve them, we need you with your special way of being and thinking. Scale yourself up through the people around you. You and I, we now have a bigger opportunity than humans have ever had on this planet to be with and work alongside people from all different backgrounds. That means we are at the vanguard. Whether all this human diversity leads to more stuckness or to more greatness, well, that's in part up to us now. Let's get to it.
Wow, what an enriching conversation. Thank you so much. I think you left us all with such tactical advice and guidance. I took a ton of notes, and your dad and family sound remarkable. So I wanted to ask you a quick question. So I know that there's been a lot written lately about code switching, and I wanted to know what your experience has been with this, and have you experienced any cost associated with code switching?
That's a really, I think, okay, thank you so much, Shilpa. That is a really important question, I think, for me, because, when I was growing up, I felt like I had to basically become a junior white person. That's what I needed to do to get myself belonged in. And I think that, for those of us who've been kind of more successful in the weird corporate construct, that's been our reality. I know for me personally, and I'd be curious, we could talk about this for hours, but sorry, Chris, we're going to end soon, don't worry. But I think this idea of code switching, by the time I hit 40, I looked really successful on the outside, but I have to say I was burned out. I was just kind of lost, because it's kind of like, if I'm a junior white person, then who am I? I've been like suppressing, almost being ashamed of the Chinese side of me. And I had this crazy opportunity to work in China, and I worked there for 10 years. And that was like incredibly eye-opening. And it let me see America, and appreciate my own cultures in a totally new way. And I do think that, and this is why I've gotten so focused and passionate for Asian Americans. I think that Asian Americans, in HR, we're always saying, oh, Asian Americans, they lack soft skills. No, that's not true at all. Asian Americans have exceptional soft skills, optimized for a different culture, which is not the weird culture. And the weird culture is an outlier in our world. And it's because we have not yet achieved full inclusion in corporate America that we have to learn these unwritten rules. I'm hoping that, all this work that I'm doing on teaching the unwritten rules, I'm hoping this is something that we put out of business as soon as possible, and that we're able to create companies that are fully inclusive of Asians being Asians. But in the meantime, I would say that what I really try to do, and I hope to impart to all Asian Americans, so I do all this, trying to put all this free content into the world, is I hope that we understand it's not that we're lacking in something, that we get really deeply connected, like I had the privilege of doing in China, getting very deeply connected in our own culture and seeing the beauty and bringing that sense of respect, interdependence, thoughtfulness, holistic thinking, all these things to the corporate world. But the way that tactically we need to get in there and make impact and get promoted so that we can make impact is we do have to do some of that adapting still, until we get up there and we become more powerful and create more inclusive organizations.
Thank you. I think it's important that we put in the work now, and I think we're going to start to see the rewards, but it is a lot of hard work and a starting, and it's a proud moment to be Asian American, but at the same time, there is light, but there is a lot of work that we need to do as a community. I think we have time for one question. So does anybody have a burning question while we have Joy here to enlighten us all? We're a bit blinded by the lights, so I can't see hands too well. Any questions from the audience? Okay, well, wonderful. Well, we will give back the time, and thank you so much, Joy. It's been an honor to have you and listen to your words of wisdom and for all of the rich data. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.